What happens in chapters 4, 5 and 6 of Robert Louis Stevenson's The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde? Let's find out. What's going on, Revision Squad? DystopiaJunkie here with another English literature revision video for you. And in this one, I'm going to continue looking at Robert Louis Stevenson's The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. This is my second video focusing on this novella, and in it I will be summarising its 4th, 5th and 6th chapters, which are called The Carew Murder Case, Incident of the Letter, and Remarkable Incident of Dr. Lanyon, respectively. As you watch along, you might find it useful to have a pen and paper in front of you so you can make notes, and you might even want to have your copy of Jekyll and Hyde with you too so you can follow along as I go. In summarising these chapters for you, I hope to help you out as you study or revise Stevenson's story, and if I am successful in doing that, I would really appreciate it if you could give this video a like, write a comment on it, share it around, and subscribe to my channel too if you haven't done so already. All of that lovely engagement tells me that you lot value what I'm doing here, which means an awful lot. So thank you so much in advance. Okay then, generic YouTuber beg out of the way. What happens in the 4th chapter of Stevenson's story, The Carew Murder Case? Between chapter 3 and 4, we experience a 1-year time jump. The story resumes here because an incident occurs. From her bedroom window, a maid witnesses Hyde murder an older gentleman, which he does so by beating the man with his cane, stamping on him, and all manner of other violent things. The whole event is so brutal that the maid is able to hear the older man's bones breaking from her bedroom window. Hyde vanishes, and when the police come to investigate the crime, they discover a number of objects hidden on the older man's body. Half of Hyde's broken cane, the man's purse and gold watch, which tells us that this was not a mugging, and, curiously, a letter addressed to Mr. Utterson. Naturally, Utterson is invited to identify the dead man, who he says is Sir Danvers Carew, a local MP. Utterson also notices that the broken cane is in fact one that he had once given to Jekyll as a present, and so he suspects that Hyde is the murderer. As such, Utterson takes the police officer investigating this case over to Hyde's place in Soho. As they navigate London's streets, which are bustling with working class people and activities, a thick fog descends upon them. Once they get to Hyde's place, they meet his landlady, who is old and apparently evil looking. She says that Hyde is not in at the moment and that his habits are quite irregular, for although she saw him last night, the night of the murder, she had not in fact seen him for 2 months before then. Utterson, the policeman, and Hyde's landlady explore Hyde's place. Although it is lavishly decorated, it appears as if it has been recently ransacked. There are clothes all over the floor, all the drawers are open, and there's a pile of ash in the fireplace. Importantly, Utterson also finds the other half of the broken cane, which confirms his suspicions that Hyde killed Sir Danvers Carew. Utterson suggests to the policeman that they try to apprehend Hyde at the bank, because among all the debris at Hyde's place, they find that he will soon be able to collect a large sum of money in cash from the bank. However, this proves to be really difficult. Very few people seem to know who Hyde actually is, and so despite an intangible sense of deformity that people seem to remember him by, he is in fact a mystery. And that is where the Carew murder case ends. I wonder, what happens in chapter 5, Incident of the Letter? But before we get on to summarising that chapter, how about a quick word about today's video sponsor, which is my good friends over at Connell Guides. They sent me over their short guide to Jekyll and Hyde recently, and honestly this was super helpful when it came to making this video.
Not only did their summary of Jekyll and Hyde help me to make more sense of the novella's plot, but it also alerted me to the fact that I had been getting Carew's name wrong throughout this entire video. I kept on putting Danvers and Carew the wrong way around, which would have been very awkward indeed. Their guide has loads of super useful ideas about the novella's context, themes and characters, which I will be sure to draw on in future videos. But if you want a copy of this guide for yourself, or any of the other 70 plus GCSE and A-level guides they have produced, head over to connellguides.com and use code RS15 at checkout for 15% off your order. Thank you for checking out Connell Guides, and thank you, Connell Guides, for sponsoring this video.
In Chapter 5, Utterson heads to Jekyll's house, where he is to meet his friend in his laboratory. Curiously, this is the first time that Jekyll has ever asked Utterson to meet him there, rather than in some other part of his house. Once Utterson gets there, he notices that, and I quote, his friend looks deadly sick. The two gentlemen begin to talk about the death of Sir Danvers Carew. Utterson asks if Jekyll has been hiding Hyde so that he can evade the authorities, to which Jekyll replies by swearing that he is done with Hyde, and then stresses that Hyde will never be seen again. Strangely confident, don't you think? As their conversation progresses, Jekyll gives Utterson a letter, which he claims was written by Hyde. Inside the letter, Hyde tells Jekyll to not worry about him anymore. Jekyll then explains to Utterson that the letter was hand-delivered that very morning, and that he has burned the envelope since receiving it. When their conversation finishes, Utterson manages to get hold of Poole, the butler, before he leaves his friend's house. Utterson asks Poole if he saw who it was that delivered the letter to Jekyll that day, presumably in the hope of this information helping him to locate Hyde and bring him to justice. But Poole replies, very confidently, that no such letter had come in the post that morning, so Jekyll could not have received the letter. Utterson is subsequently suspicious about what has really gone on. Later that very same day, Utterson meets with Mr. Guest, who is his head clerk, close confidant, and also apparently an expert in handwriting. As the two men share a bottle of wine, Utterson shares with Guest the thing that has been troubling him, this whole business with Jekyll and Hyde, and now this letter as well. Guest asks to look at the letter and then at a note from Dr. Jekyll, which just at that very moment has been brought in by a servant. Guest concludes that, apart from a very strange slant to Hyde's handwriting, Jekyll and Hyde, in fact, have identical handwriting. This brings Utterson to worry, for he believes that the identical handwriting means that Jekyll has forged the letter from Hyde. But why? So Chapter 6 begins with another stretch of time passing. In this time, the hunt for Hyde fails, but lots of strange rumours about him begin to spread. Now, in the time since Hyde has disappeared, Dr. Jekyll has gained a new lease of life. He is friendly to everyone around him, throws even more parties and dinners than usual, and becomes increasingly philanthropic, giving money to charities and the church alike. But then, in mid-January, something suddenly changes, and Jekyll shuts himself away from the outside world once more. Curious about his friend's sudden seclusion, Utterson once again goes to see Dr. Lanyon for some answers. Once he sees his friend, though, he notices that he appears to be on the brink of death. Lanyon explains that he has received a great shock recently and feels that he may die soon. So Utterson asks him about Jekyll, but Lanyon shuts down the conversation. Jekyll, he says, is dead to him. As per usual, Utterson is confused, and so this time he writes a letter to Jekyll asking him what has happened between the two old friends. Jekyll replies in writing, stating that he wishes to live a life of seclusion because he has done something very, very bad. 3 weeks after Utterson meets with him, Lanyon dies. Following this, Utterson opens an envelope from Lanyon. Lanyon specified that this envelope was only to be opened in the event of his death, but inside it is just another envelope, which is to be opened in the event that Jekyll dies or disappears. Around this time, Utterson also gains some information from Poole. Jekyll is spending more and more of his time in his laboratory these days. And with Jekyll's increasing seclusion in his lab, that is where chapter 6 of the novella comes to an end. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you found it to be helpful and you're looking forward to seeing more videos about Jekyll and Hyde, please do let me know. You could give this video a like, write a comment on it, share it around with anybody else who might find it useful, and you could even subscribe to my channel too, if you haven't done so already. I hope that you have an awesome rest of the day. If you are studying or revising, please do remember to take frequent short breaks, as a burned out student is not a happy or successful student, which is what I think you deserve to be.
So what happens in chapters 4, 5 and 6 of Jekyll and Hyde? Well, in chapter 4, Hyde murders Sir Danvers Carew, a local MP. In chapter 5, Dr. Jekyll gives Utterson a letter that is apparently forged. And in chapter 6, Dr. Jekyll and Dr. Lanyon appear to have fallen out once again, and Dr. Jekyll has locked himself up in his lab because he has done something very, very evil. The plot, as they say, thickens.